Hey folks, do your eyes pop open in just stunned disbelief each time you open your energy bill here in the state of Rhode Island? Well, prices are about to double for a new report put out by our center, the Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity, and it's all because of the negligence, the lack of due diligence, the lack of any cost versus benefit analysis by Ocean State lawmakers and bureaucrats in the Department of Environmental Management. Hey, welcome to Sten Reacts. Today, I'm going to be reacting to a report put out in mid-May by our Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity. The report is entitled, something you've heard me talk about before here, it's entitled Freezing in the Dark, how Ocean State's green net zero and green energy agenda not only could lead to unaffordably high electricity prices, but also could lead to grid shortages that could lead to brownouts or blackouts. Imagine a blackout. Imagine no energy on the coldest of days, coldest of nights, winter nights, or the hottest of summer days. It's not just us saying it. It's some of the largest energy non-government organizations in the region who are saying this. I'll get into that in just a second. But because of the negligence of our lawmakers who are beholden to a political agenda, a green energy agenda, a climate alarmist agenda, you know the agenda, they did not do their proper work. They did not do their research. They did not do their homework. And now they have set Rhode Island on a path where we might face staggering, and I repeat that word, and here it is in our report, staggering costs and risks because of those green energy policies. Here is that report, which we call Freezing in the Dark. And we say it right up front what it's all about. Lawmakers have been negligent, and don't just take our word for it. Rhode Island Energy, who provides most homes and businesses in the state with energy, the Rhode Island Public Utilities Commission, which sets those prices, and ISO New England, which is the regional entity that allocates and makes sure there's enough energy for our region. But they have to comply with state energy laws. They all have talked about the staggering costs that are ahead, the lack of capacity, and bottom line is the lack of technology. We do not have the technology to build and support enough green energy, as right now state law mandates we must in the coming years. We do not have the technology to produce and store enough power to meet the anticipated future electricity demands of our state. We don't have it. But so the question is, why didn't Rhode Island lawmakers know this? Why not? They didn't look. That's why. They just said, well, we need to reduce carbon emissions, whatever the cost, whatever the damage, whatever the harm might be. We're just going to do whatever we can to go green and to eschew the proven, abundant, low cost, reliable fossil fuel energy that has benefited so much of the world and so many Americans and so many Rhode Islanders over the past couple of centuries. We're just going to dump all that, get rid of all that, and we're going to go to this unproven, unreliable, non-abundant, high cost, and believe it or not, worse for the environment when you look at the total picture, green energy alternatives. So we're going to get into that in a second. But first, we've talked about the negligence of Ocean State lawmakers. Now I want to issue a warning to them. This report and recent reports that we've been involved with and we've told you about in recent months is a warning to lawmakers. You know, there's a axiom that proper planning prevents poor performance. But you know what? The inverse is true too. But let's stay with that. The inverse. In fact, in California, if you remember the recent fires out in the Pasadena area and the and out that way, I mean, it was horrible to think about Pacific Palisades and all that. That axiom of proper planning prevents poor performance was ignored. Those horrific and catastrophic fires out there happened, and they were warned about it and did nothing about it. And similarly, Rhode Island lawmakers are being warned today. Um, and this adherence to agenda-driven priorities by compromised politicians and bureaucrats simply refuse to look at the reality of the world, the reality of their decisions, and refuse to heed any of the warnings issued to them, like they did in California about their lack of appropriate forestry and water and infrastructure strategy. They had the wrong strategy. People knew about it, people told them about it, and they did nothing about it. And here in Rhode Island, we have the wrong strategy, a net zero, massively fast carbon reduction strategy is the wrong scenario, and it's going to lead to similar apocalyptic scenarios if we don't change costs. In fact, the fires in California, and here it is. You know, we use the term freezing in the dark. Well, look at this. This in California is burning in the dark. Here is Pacific Palisades. Somebody took this picture for burning in the dark. That's what happened in California. Freezing in the dark right here is what could happen in Rhode Island if we don't smarten up and face reality about our energy plans in this state. The warnings were issued in California and ignored. The warnings have now been issued in Rhode Island. Will lawmakers take heed? And there's a lot of reasons why. I'll get into this. Or will they fail to act? And will the inverse of that axiom prove true, that improper planning promotes poor performance? And right now in Rhode Island, we are on a track towards poor performance. Whether that's high prices, whether that's brownouts, whether that's blackouts, whether that's freezing in the dark, just sky high prices. This is what's coming to Rhode Island. Yet Rhode Island lawmakers continue to stick their heads in the sand. So this Sten Reacts, this report we put out, again, is intended to serve as a warning to policymakers about the dire consequences that we all could face if our state's energy strategy is not performed. And in many ways, you know, the theme, the report we put out last fall, the government's assault on ocean state families, continues. And energy is probably the number one culprit. We are unnecessary. You know, high energy costs are not the fault of Rhode Island Energy. It's not the fault of the Rhode Island Public Utilities Commission. High energy costs can be directly traced as a root cause to public policy that, like we said, is taxing or making fossil fuel energy, either one, making it no more of a choice, or taxing it to death, and instead trying to replace it with high cost and unreliable green energy alternatives. It's those public policies that purposely drive up the cost of electricity and power and energy in our state. That is a large reason we have inflation in the state. Cost of living, others call it. I call it local inflation. It's a primary reason we have just an insecure future for Rhode Island. So let's go to the report and let's just scroll through it quickly, and I'll just quickly talk about some of the highlights here. So here's the title page. I want to thank Monique Chartier, put in a lot of research for this. She was contacting Rhode Island Energy for comments, and we'll show you those as we move forward here. Again, you know, this warning to lawmakers. There's only one reason lawmakers are supposed to be making laws. That's to promote the public good, right? That's all they should be doing when it comes to promoting any kind of legislation or regulation. But instead, they craft policies that are designed to advance a political agenda, regardless of whether it helps or harms the public good. And this has got to change. This agenda-driven identity politics, approach that we see so often from the left and from many on the right as well, has to end. But we already pay some of the highest energy prices in the country. And it's because of public policy. It's not based on, it's not ordained by God above. And you can see here that Rhode Island Energy President admitted as such, that it's public policy that's driving high costs. Rhode Island Energy, Public Utilities Commission, ISO New England, all have to produce and price energy according to mandates of state law. And it's so they have to do it. Here's a report by the Mackinac Center, which is our big sister think tank out in Michigan. Very, very influential, very big. They're 20 times bigger than we are. Amazing group of people. They did a report, and I had their report author on last year. But across the board, look down here. Across the board, wind and solar, geothermal, hydroelectric, F for wind, F for solar, D plus for geothermal. Hydroelectric is okay at a B minus, but these traditional green energy sources are not viable energy sources when you look at the whole spectrum of considerations. And that means, what does it take to extract or mine the components necessary, extract the oil or the natural gas, or mine or extract the lithium and the cobalt and the other rare earth minerals needed to make, the batteries and wind turbines and blades and all that stuff. So when you look at the extraction of components, we know that the mining of those green energy components is very toxic, involves a lot of unethical child and women's and forced labor as well, the Uyghurs in China and whatnot. And then when you look to the actual power production, okay, green energy is green, it's clean at that point, but the extraction part is heavily toxic, heavily costly. There's not a lot of these materials around. There's not a lot of wind. There's not a lot of sun all the time. And then when you look at the disposal, after we burn the energy, what happens with the cars? What happens with the blades? What happens with the solar panels? So when you look at the total costs, not just the cost of actual producing the energy, but the cost before, during, and after, and you look at the environmental impact. I mean, just look what these wind turbines are doing in the ocean to sea life. These whales washing up ashore everywhere. When you look at the birds killed by the solar panels, or by the wind farms on land, it's devastating. And not to mention the visual pollution to our pristine vistas. So for all these reasons, again, when you look at this research, great research done by the Mackinac Center in Michigan, wind and solar rank near dead last. Natural gas, coal, even coal ranks ahead of them when you look at all the values involved. So the reality here, as we state, is that green energy sources just are not ready yet for prime time. I hope they are someday, but we have to take an all of the above approach. We're going to need fossil fuels and natural gas and petroleum, and maybe even bring back some coal for years and decades to come. We're not going to be able to meet our energy demands of the future with just green energy sources. It's just not politics. And you know what? People are getting sick. They're not buying it anymore. They're not buying the existential threat narrative anymore, and they're not willing to pay exorbitant prices for something that makes insignificant climate impact. We call it in our report legislative and bureaucratic negligence. They just did not do their homework. They didn't care. They set arbitrary green energy toxics based on false narratives and false assumptions about existential threat and rising oceans and blah, 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 and social environmental equity, whatever the heck that is. And they just put forth these targets that have set Rhode Island on this path of increased costs and increased unreliability of our grid. Again, we can find no meaningful cost versus benefit analysis. The millions and millions of dollars it's going to cost taxpayers and ratepayers to go green compared with virtually zero environmental benefit. How does that work out in a cost benefit? Here we go. Rhode Island Public Utilities Commission right here talks about the substantial cost to be imposed on ratepayers. Rhode Island Energy, there is no actual plans to upgrade our infrastructure to meet future electricity demands. Yet, Rhode Island lawmakers put us on that path. Anyway, in ISO New England, the organization responsible for managing the electrical grid and making sure each state and region gets enough electricity, talks about significant costs and unresolved reliability concerns. Like I said before, the technology does not exist to go green the way they want you to. And lawmakers just ignored this. Were they willfully ignorant, or did they just fail to ask questions? They are flying blind. They have set us on a path, an unsustainable path, with no plan to get there. As we say right in the beginning of our report, and this is really, if you want to sum it up, in their quest to plan for a sustainable future, again, that word sustainable, which if you see that, you know it's a false narrative. But anyway, in their quest to plan for a sustainable future, state officials have enacted policies and goals that can now be shown to be dangerously unsustainable. And they are from a price point of view and from a capacity point of view. Stunning findings, just stunning findings in our report. Let me read a few of them to you right here. So electricity rates in Rhode Island and in our New England region are going to double outside of inflation in the coming years. 58 for Rhode Island alone, $58.4 billion investment in order to develop the green energy infrastructure as it is currently mandated right now. That's the cost side of things. Then we look at the dangerous blackouts and brownouts that are forecast. Again, freezing in the dark on the coldest of winter nights, boiling in the heat, boiling in the day, boiling in the light on the hottest of summer days. And then we add the environmental damage. I mean, this is where they stick their heads in the sand. And this is where environmentalists and naturalists and climate change alarmists are often at odds with each other. But it's becoming increasingly clear to anyone who looks around that these green energy windmills and solar farms especially have all kinds of toxic side effects from their mining, from when they break down and break apart and fall into the sea or upon our land, or when it comes to disposing of those components. And then we're killing wildlife and sea life, and we are destructing certain parts of the destruction of certain parts of the environment, as well as the visual pollution of the pristine vista. So what do we do about it? So we're recommending two steps. Initially, near-term steps. I think it's important that lawmakers recognize that they've got us on the wrong path. All right. They don't have to admit they are negligent. Let's just have them admit, okay, despite all our work and foresight and assumptions and narratives, this is not sustainable for Ocean State residents, the path we're on. So signal to the public, please, lawmakers, signal to the public that you recognize the problem you've created. This is a self-inflicted wound. You created this problem. So we're saying two things. First, delay all green energy milestones. 2030 was the original date set forth, I think, to be 50% carbon reductions, and then 2050 was to be net zero in Rhode Island. It's not possible. New York is greatly delaying its 2030 targets of 70%. Ours are similar at 50%. They're going to be pushing theirs back by decades. So blue states are already doing this. Rhode Island needs to push its mandates back by at least 20, 30 years. And let's see Let's give us time and space for these green energy technologies, battery storage and whatnot to develop and get to a point where they're market friendly from a cost and reliability point of view, and that we know we can also produce and manage them and dispose of them in an environmentally friendly way. But right now, green energy is not market ready. It's not ready for prime time. Let's delay all green energy milestones by at least 20, 30 years. Next, let's immediately repeal the silly and folly and really unconstitutional, I think, electric vehicle mandate. In America, and with the left, you've always talked freedom of choice. We need choice. We want freedom of choice. Well, why should Rhode Islanders not have a choice about what kind of vehicle or truck they should buy? Why should we be forced to buy an electric vehicle that is much more expensive, much less reliable, can only go so far, especially when you add weight to it or you add extreme heat or extreme cold, they become much less reliable. And they're so much more expensive to maintain, and they won't do anything to improve the environment because guess what? The electricity to charge them has to be produced somehow. We just showed you that it can't be reliably produced by green energy sources. So if we're producing that much more electricity to charge all these millions and or at least in Rhode Island hundreds of thousands of electric vehicles, there's no trade-off. Sure, the cars might produce less emissions themselves, the EVs, but there's more emissions on the electricity production side that's needed to charge them. That's not a win-win. But yet, Rhode Island lawmakers and policymakers want to impose these massive restrictions on the vehicles that motorists in our state can buy. So that's the second and on all of these policies. One thing I didn't mention right up front, one of the main reasons Rhode Island has to change course is there's no more federal support, or is it going to be decreasing federal support for these green energy policies. The Green New Deal put in by Biden, much of it has been repealed already by executive order by President Trump. He's already said, we're not paying for any more electric vehicle charging infrastructure. We're not paying for any more subsidies for electric vehicle purchases. So how is Rhode Island going to support an electric vehicle mandate without the millions and millions and millions of dollars that were supposed to come in from the federal government? They're not coming in anymore. We cannot go it alone. We cannot afford it alone. And again, if you do a cost benefit analysis, there is no value to it. It will not save the planet from global warming. It just doesn't do that because you're saving a little here, but spending a little bit more over here when it comes to emissions. It just doesn't work. And now we all know artificial intelligence is going to be placing huge electricity demands. Every home, every business, government's going to be using more and more of it. And it's going to demand more and more electricity. Where's it going to come from if it's not coming from green energy sources? We have to change our mandate. We have to rely more on fossil fuels. And here's the thing. Even though we've minimally, when you look at the big pie charts, it's slivers, tiny slivers of green energy is produced compared to traditional fossil fuels in Rhode Island. I mean, in America. But America, because of fossil technologies that produce more clean coal emissions, more clean gas, petroleum, we're doing so well on the technology front that America has actually led the world in reducing its carbon emissions. We've done it by over 20% in America, and we've done that without being part of the Paris Climate Accord, without going massively green. We've done that by relying more on natural gas and more on technology to reduce emissions from other carbon-based sources. So relying on fossil fuels is not going to harm the planet. There is no existential threat, and we do not have to leave fossil fuels. There's no need. We will continue to produce more. We need to continue to produce more and more energy. And if we can do so at lower carbon emissions, like the trend has been, all the better. So those are two immediate steps. Delay all those green energy milestones in our state and immediately repeal electric vehicle mandate. Now, we also need a longer-term strategy, and it has to be an all-of-the-above approach. It has to include natural gas, it has to include nuclear. These new small modular reactors are very safe, can provide abundant, maybe not cheap, it's a little, but still we can provide reliable and almost zero emission power to our region. We need to relax and review, if not repeal, a lot of the regulations on new cars and homes and businesses and everything else that's requiring expensive and green components that either drives up the costs of these buildings and homes, or that just say it's not worth building them. I'm not going to build them. I'm not going to modify it. I'm not going to add a new wing. I'm not going to build a new house because I'm not going to comply. So these regulations are really hurting. Hey, look, these renewables, these alternative sources of energy, wind, solar, whatever, fine. Once they're market ready, just like anything, once it's market ready, once it's priced right, once it doesn't do environmental damage, once it becomes reliable and abundant, sure, add it in. But when it's ready, it's not ready for prime time right now. We need energy storage technology. Right now, there are some large batteries you can put on grid that might be able to supply a few hours worth of power on these really peak days. But what if we go to a 3 or 4 or 1 week cold snap or heat spell? The battery technology right now can't come close to making up for any deficiency in our grid, and we certainly can't rely on borrowing energy from other parts of the country. It's just not fast enough, reliable enough, cost efficient enough. So we need to continue to develop energy storage. We need to upgrade our grid, probably increase natural gas pipeline capacity, and we need to build more, underground, probably transmission wires, because we're going to need more energy wherever it comes from, right? Wherever it comes from, we're going to need more energy. So we got to, but without relying on green energy, we can upgrade our grid more slowly and at less immediate cost, and that's the problem. And again, fossil fuels have to be considered the primary source of electricity in our state for years to come. We just have to. Well, we don't have enough sun, we don't have enough wind, and we can't afford the cost. So, and as I just explained, relying on renewables is not a death sentence for the world, or for the climate, or for necessary increasingly or unreasonable levels of increased carbon emissions. So we need an energy approach that maintains the well-being and quality of life for Ocean State residents. That's what public policy should do. Instead, right now, public policy is going to hurt the well-being, the quality of life, and the prosperity of Ocean State families and businesses. And it's going to do so while also harming the environment and harming economic growth. I mean, this path we are on is absolutely unsustainable. Again, lawmakers trying to develop a sustainable energy future have put Rhode Island on an unsustainable path. Oh, the irony. Oh, the irony. Again, California lawmakers were warned. They ignored the warnings. They stuck their heads in the sand, and they end up burning in the dark. Now, in the last few months, with a number of reports our centers put out, and this one just earlier in May, Rhode Island lawmakers are being warned, and if they ignore it, it could lead to freezing in the dark. There are staggering costs and risks to Rhode Island's net zero energy policies, and lawmakers must take heed, and you must force them to take heed to change their strategy. And instead of providing for a dark energy future for our state, how about we have an energy strategy that provides for a bright and prosperous energy future for all Rhode Islanders? All right, hey, thanks for tuning in to this edition of Sten Reacts. Remember, all my Sten Reacts episodes can be found at oceanstatecurrent.com. Select the watch menu item at the top of the screen, and then select Sten Reacts from that long drop-down list there. So thanks for tuning in, and until then, hope you enjoyed this reaction. We'll see you again soon. Ciao.